It's a rainy Friday in San Francisco. What are you going to do this weekend? If you've had a busy week, you might be thinking about doing some kind of self care this weekend. Maybe you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed with your life, like you're constantly having to play catch up every day. Or maybe you're feeling just sort of reactive, like you're not fully present in your life, or you're just kind of going through the motions, like on autopilot. You might also be a little bit confused about like what exactly will can I do that will actually restore me and not just drain me even more, right? And the bigger the self-care industry gets, the more confusing that can be because things are sort of sold to us as being self-care products, but sometimes can just leave us feeling more drained. So I want to share with you a guiding principle for how to think about self-care that will help you make decisions about what to do that will actually be restorative. Self-care is anything that builds intimacy with yourself. So it's anything you do that brings you closer to yourself, as opposed to things you do that take you further away from yourself. So an example of that might be, scrolling through social media, right? To me, that leaves me with a feeling of like emptiness and just a stimulated feeling that is just on the surface, or I feel just more distracted afterwards. So self care is anything that helps you feel close to yourself and build that intimacy with yourself. And so there are three ways to go about doing this. The first way is self reflection. So it's a curious and non judgmental inquiry into your experience. You can think about it like sitting down with a really great friend who loves you and cares about you, except it's yourself. And they're asking you questions about your experience, like, how are you? How was your week? Maybe something hard happened for you that week. So you might ask yourself, like, what happened there? What happened that impacted me so deeply? And what was it that I was really needing in that moment? And so it's a way to just learn more about your experience and build that closeness with who you are. An activity that you can do is journaling. And I don't mean the kind of journaling where you're like, Dear Diary, here's what I did today. No, it's the journaling where you're asking yourself these questions and using writing as a way of slowing down your thinking. So letting each question really sitting with each one and slowly kind of contemplatively writing out each answer. So another way of building closeness with yourself is through self-expression. So we are made up of all these different parts. And if you're living a modern life, you probably have some kind of rhythm to your week, like going to work every day. And when we go to work, we're using only certain parts of ourselves, right? So there's certain parts of ourselves that are getting fed a lot and get to show up a lot. But then there are certain parts of ourselves that don't get to show up that often and are kind of starved. And so self-expression really means those parts, letting those parts that are starved show up and feeding them. And so if you work a job where you're called to being like really professional and really like self-regulating and using your logic brain a lot, right? Then maybe a form of self-expression for you would be like playfulness or doing something artistic, doing something with your hands maybe. And so it's like letting those parts of you that don't normally get to show up fully. The third way of building closeness with yourself is through self-affirmations. Affirmations have a really bad rap. And if you're like me and most of my clients, like taking compliments is like really uncomfortable sometimes. And so the thought of giving yourself a compliment is just sounds really narcissistic and, kind of self-indulgent, right? But affirmations are not compliments. Affirmations are simply stated truths about you that you say to yourself. So examples of that, like if I were going to give you an affirmation, I would say, you are whole. You are lovable. You belong, right? But instead of someone else giving you that affirmation, you're giving yourself that affirmation. And that's a really powerful reframe because We often give other people the power to define who we are and give us permission to be who we are. But when we give ourselves an affirmation, we are giving ourselves the authority to say who we are. And so instead of looking in the mirror and saying, you are blank, you are blank, try closing your eyes and saying to yourself, I am lovable. I am whole. I am perfect just as I am. And it can be super just like basic truths, like I am here always, right? So affirmations are these deep core truths about ourselves that when we say them, we feel this sense of groundedness and this sense of certainty. So self-care is anything that builds intimacy with yourself. 3 ways of doing it: self-reflection, a non-judgmental and caring inquiry into your experience. Self-expression, letting the parts of you that don't normally get to show up and be fed. 3rd way is self-affirmation, saying to yourself things that only you can say to yourself. Only you can say, I am whole, to yourself and mean it, right? So giving yourself that power and authority to determine who you are. Have a great weekend, guys. Thank you.